Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Connecting the Dots, Abortion Bans and the Criminalization of Pregnant People. Looks like that folks showed up early, so this is good. We are going to have our other panelists come in. All right, so why are we here? We have the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. And a lot of people are extremely outraged over this development, and rightly so. However, since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, there has been a concerted and well-funded and very well thought out effort to chip away at our legal right to abortion care over the course of decades. And it's culminated in a decision that many people were surprised about. I don't think that people knew that we were on the field of a game that was being played without our knowledge. And now we've awakened to this because of the decision. And what we want people to understand is that the Roe v. Wade decision was the floor. It gave just the very minimal right to abortion care, but it did not actually provide meaningful access to abortion. And so essentially the floor was taken away from us. And for a moment, it's been a little bit over a month, we've been in this kind of free fall feeling. And now it's time for us to stop the fall and start to envision something better. This intense need to do something does not mean that we rush to reinstate a framework that already did not provide meaningful access to abortion for the most marginalized and vulnerable among us. And it was a framework that already set up a situation where pregnant people could face harm for choices that they made during pregnancy. And so this panel was put together through work that's happening with those of us who are speakers today in the intersections of the work that we do to be able to answer some questions about some things that have recently gone on. Like, there was a ballot initiative that folks got really excited about, and ultimately it didn't get enough signatures to be on the ballot. We have this really interesting dynamic happening with Planned Parenthood endorsements right now, where they endorse candidates who agreed that they would not take endorsements and money from police. And so there's clearly a disconnect around the people who need abortion care and their interactions and vulnerability with the harmful police state that we have here in Arizona. And we have our activist and storyteller and reproductive justice activist, Alejandra Pablos, whose life and body sits at the intersection of so many of these important issues related to abortion bans or criminalization and all of these things. And so what we want to be able to do is walk you through why it's important to be not just pro-choice, because what pro-choice does is say, I'm okay with I'm okay with abortion to a certain extent. I wouldn't have an abortion, but I think that it's probably, I start to have a problem with those people having those third trimester abortions. Like, the majority of Americans believe that abortion should be safe and legal, but many Americans also agree that there should be some restrictions. And so what we want you to understand is everybody has an individual circumstance. And therefore the decision lies in that person's circumstance and that person's pregnancy. And it's honestly none of the rest of our business. And so we want to be working toward a reality that provides a framework where individuals get to make decisions about their bodies and their lives and control their own reproductive destiny. And so my intention for you today is to know and understand that there is no acceptable abortion ban. And I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. And then we'll get into some discussion. Alex?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Deshawn. Lucky to call Deshawn a colleague, a friend, and just overall somebody I share a lot of values with. So I'm just really excited to join this conversation with, Karen and Erica also, we are in coalition right now, right? And trying to stay organized, stay ready in a moment of confusion, right? In a moment where Arizona really is leading on really all the awful stuff we're really not proud of, right? But really staying connected and building with people where we want to create work and we want to do work that we are very proud of, right? Work that is uplifting the communities that have been impacted most by in criminalization, right? And criminalization is this huge thing with different tentacles, right? And it's happening through policy, it's happening through media, through false net rhetoric, right? It's it is just, again, the root of just oppression overall, right? And I'm just really excited again. I feel like the way that I show up as a reproductive justice community organizer, as a language justice worker, I really show up using my incarceration and my personal experiences, having abortions, right, as a way to fight stigma. It's really interesting, being fighting my own deportation case for almost 12 years now, how I've learned around criminalization. And it would be so funny that, of course, I also share my abortion story and I support people who have abortions. And now this other piece of my identity, right, it is another reason to stack on to why Arizona and the US want to deport me or want to incarcerate people like me. So yeah, I'm here, again, to talk about state violence, right? Talk about state violence and the intersections around state violence, and talk about how these abortion bans are a form of state violence, right? And how policy really impacts us and separates families, right? And how we have a crisis of prison, crisis of punishment, crisis, right? And a crisis of not investing in our communities and investing in policing and surveillance. So really excited to join the conversation today. And again, my immigration story really informs me, right? My decisions to not want to parent, my decisions, to live a free, life as an immigrant, queer woman, right? And just challenge a lot of binaries. So I'm very, very close to familiar by being criminalized by the state. So excited to share with you all more. And I will be sharing my social media handles too, so you can keep following and supporting the grassroots organization that I'm a part of. I'll pass it on to Erica and Garen, maybe.
Thank you, Ale. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica. My pronouns are she, her. This is Garen.
He, him.
His pronouns are he, him. We're married, which is why we're in the same screen. so that's not confusing. We are sort of new to Arizona. We are coming up on our 2-year anniversary of living here, which is wild. It feels like we just got here, but it has been 2 years. We are living in the Sedona area, and we're raising a 5-year-old child with a uterus. And we care deeply about abortion rights, and we care about abolishing abortion bans. We came at this certainly from a very abortion-specific window. I needed third trimester abortion care many years ago. I was living in a blue state that everybody told me was a safe place to need care, a quote unquote savior state, if you will. And then what I found out when I really needed care in the third trimester is that in fact, my state did have an abortion ban that people didn't consider an abortion ban, which is the viability standard, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But it was through the experience of being denied care and then understanding how incredibly lucky we were to be able to surmount the various barriers to getting on a plane last minute, booking last minute hotels, last minute travel, paying thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket for the care itself, kind of trying to put all the pieces together in the moment. And right away, I mean, we were on that plane going, what do people do who don't have, you know, a mom to borrow money from, who don't have IDs so they can fly, who might speak English as a second language, who might, you know, going through all of the various privileges that were required for us to surmount this abortion ban that we didn't know existed until we were in the moment and desperately needed care. And so that was in 2016. And since then, our understanding has just constantly evolved. We've gotten closer and closer to the real problem, I think, after building bridges and meeting so many people across many social justice spaces, realizing at the core, we all have the same problem. We're all dealing with the state. And as Ale put it so well, those tentacles, now we're gonna like make a squid meme or something. It's just such a good, mental picture. But we're very excited to jump into this with you all. And thank you so much for coming. I'm reading everyone's intros. You're all coming at this with really great intentions and just like, thank you for being here. Yes, this is what I do with my 5-year-old. We do this all the time. Thank you for coming with an open mind and for being willing to have what is, I know at times a hard conversation, or can be for people. We're stretching our brains and it's not easy. And so thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for being just, I consider our fearless leader. I know we're all in coalition, but I also think you're our leader, and we're so lucky that we have just this, an abortion provider who is so rooted in her values to be our leader. I mean, it's an amazing opportunity we have in Arizona. So if it's okay, I think we're going to maybe transition to the first discussion point, or no, are we doing intentions? Should we do our intentions?
Yes.
Dr. Taylor? So my intention is for everyone in this virtual space to leave with the understanding that we are not going to protect abortion access with an abortion ban. And I want you all to leave here feeling hopeful and energized and ready to fight for something better.
And my intention is for us to really understand and be able to paint a picture of who the villain actually is, which is, in this case, it's actually the state. And I mean, that's capital S state, is the state, the government, and take power back. I think a lot of times policymakers and lawyers and professional advocates can make this feel a little more complicated than it actually is. But for me, it's actually about who has the power, what they can do with it, and whom they can do it to. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So, yeah.
Okay, so fun to be here with both of you as a couple, like couples who organize together, stay together. So sending y'all some luck and love. I just want to share really quickly my intention as well, and I forgot to share that. I'm from Tucson. I'm based in Phoenix. Autumn lands. I feel like, having just shot in Phoenix, y'all in Sedona, I'm actually taking this call from Tucson, where I spend 50% of my time in trying to just, again, seeing how, we're just reaching across areas, and really trying to connect the state, so just really excited that we're talking again. But I wanted to share that I shared that I was in deportation proceedings, and I didn't share where I'm from. I was born in Mexico. I was born in, my whole family is like lineages all up and down this area when the border moved and all that stuff. So, having to face displacement and just kind of like even fighting, to stay and on stolen land is just a trip in itself, and all the criminalization. I always think like, wow, there's not going to be any repro rights or repro justice if there's just no justice for native land, right? And there's still no land back, so just kind of wanted to ground us in and yeah, where we're calling from and where we're all coming from. But my intention today is just that folks kind of understand that like we're facing reproductive justice violations across the nation, obviously in Arizona as well, right? And trying to name some of those. I've already named some things like immigration, even like we'll talk a little bit more about the prison crisis, right? All of those, like family separation is a violation of reproductive justice, right? Legalized unhousing of people is a violation, right? Legalized poverty and so forth. So I really want people to just leave with like kind of like a broader vision of what reproductive justice, is. and to understand that, you know, a bans on abortions, right, threats to our reproductive justice, or our reproductive lives are a threat of people who actually want to have babies, right? Like a reason why I haven't wanted to have children is because literally there's violence on pregnant people all the time. As a mother, I would not feel safe. I can't protect my children and so forth, right? So I think we're fighting for more than abortion. We're fighting for justice overall and freedom, right? To move and remain. Deshawn, did you want to share your intention, or did you share?
So I did. I shared mine. And so we're going to get into the discussion here. Again, you know, when I mentioned a little bit in the framing that there was this intense need to, oh my gosh, we lost Roe, let's put it back. And so, you know, we want to take a moment now to really talk about what did Roe really do? And so we're going to have Erica and Garen take that over for us, start that conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Yeah, so I think a lot of people, you know, vaguely know that Roe established a right. And now, and like Dr. Taylor said, now that it's been overturned, people are like, that's what we want back. Because in a way, Roe is synonymous with the right to abortion for a lot of people. But what we want to talk about real quick is that codifying the Roe framework is a double-edged sword. And so while it may protect a limited right to abortion, it also establishes the state's interest in pregnancy, which leads to policing and punishment of pregnant people, particularly those in already over-policed communities. So like, we're going to talk about real quick, what did Roe do? So most people know this, it established the right to abortion up to a point. Or as legal scholar Dr. Kiara Bridges has noted, it created the right to buy an abortion, if you can find and afford one, right? It's a very different way to think about it. The other thing that it did, and a lot of people don't talk about this, is that it recognized the state's interest in potential fetal life, okay? And by recognizing that interest, it meant that then, you know, it gave the state a place in this conversation. So you have this right of individuals, and now you have this state interest, and the court sought to balance those two.
And by the way, they just claimed that interest. They never actually justified it or explained why the state should have an interest beyond just claiming a sense of protection. That was literally it. They just said it and everybody said, okay.
So they have an interest. And so now they're trying to balance it. And they wanted to figure out, how can we have this right, but also still give the state some control, right? And this is what's interesting. So the court, the lawyers who sat on the Supreme Court, not doctors.
Those white dudes you see on your screen.
and Thurgood Marshall, created the trimester framework. So this ubiquitous thing that we all think about when we think about pregnancy was created in the Roe v. Wade decision to organize how the state could exercise control over pregnant people. That is not to say that the trimester framework isn't useful in a medical context, but it was designed specifically for this reason. So in the first trimester, you have an unlimited right. In the second trimester, the state can do some things. This was the Roe standard at the time. And then in the third trimester, if a state wanted to, they can prohibit care altogether. That was later adjusted by Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which we won't get into. The critical thing is that at the point of potential fetal viability, and at that time that was thought of as like the third trimester.
Also articulated by the court, not from the medical community, from the court.
That balance between these interests, between the pregnant individual's interests and the state interest, that balance tips. And suddenly the state's interest can be controlling, such that they can ban abortions. This ultimately allows the state to criminalize abortion, to create restrictions on abortion care, and to generally coerce people into not getting abortions and to make it hard. And so in practice, the rights established in Roe and the application of restrictions that allowed were always unequally experienced and applied based on race and socioeconomic status. Because again, just as saying that you have the right to buy an abortion if you can get to one or find one doesn't actually help people access care.
And I want to say, so far, we've been talking about abortion because I think folks who have joined us here today have probably a good understanding of abortion at the least. But I want to be very clear that by establishing the state's interest in pregnancy, it had all of these ramifications beyond abortion. So while, yes, we gained this limited right to abortion access, establishing that state controlling interest led to policing and punishment of pregnant people, again, particularly those in over-policed communities. And so what's important to know is this controlling interest has implications far beyond abortion. Like what? People can be criminalized for miscarriages. People have been forced into C-sections they don't want. And by the way, when they're forced into C-sections, these judges cite Roe as proof that the state has a compelling interest. People have been kept on life support when they are dying so that the fetus can continue to develop. This is against their family's wishes, who want them taken off life support. Again, because the state has claimed this interest, they're able to inject themselves into these personal decisions on behalf of that state interest. Is that, I hope people are with us here. I know it starts to get into the.
But the big thing here is that, like, once you have a law, which Roe allowed laws, it allowed bans after a certain point in pregnancy. Once that exists, then the state can enforce those laws. And so I think next we're going to be talking about, how does the state enforce something? What happens when the state has an interest and it wants to exercise that interest? What are the tools available to the state, and how do those actually play out in communities?
Thanks, y'all. Alejandra here. I want to also share that it's when we're gonna, when we hear some of what we're gonna share, we're going to be reminded of what the state has done when people rose up around the George Floyd uprising, right? 2 years ago, right? When we were exercising our freedom of speech as well, and our right to protest, and how they criminalized that, right? And how even felonies were created. So I think another thing that like Roe v. Wade did also was wake our communities up, right? And also like in connecting the dots of what are we really talking about, right? Which is again what Garen kind of shared, control and surveillance, right? So I again, it's super important to see like this like broader vision of what's really happening in Arizona, fourth largest state of, and growing their prisons here. I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Deshawn.
Yeah, so this is a great. I saw someone didn't send this mind blown emoji to everyone. But mind blown, right? Like, even myself as a physician, I graduated medical school in 2001. And for me, the trimester framework was a medical framework. Like, there's milestones in pregnancy. And so it's like, we just kind of marched along and accepted and started to make decisions based on this. And, from, a standpoint, we have adopted it to be fairly useful to us, as I'm an OBGYN physician. And so I found the trimester framework useful. But what I have experienced in my discourse with other physicians, especially those who deal with high-risk pregnancies and counsel people for abnormalities, genetic and fetal, it becomes very close to their heart, as people progress in pregnancy, to put the potential life of the fetus ahead of the person who is pregnant. And one of the things that I have thought about as a physician is the idea of decolonizing how I practice obstetrics and gynecology, because once you realize how much of what you do is about protecting the fetus and not the pregnant person, then you start to realize how you are a tool to cause harm and trauma to pregnant people. And it causes a reflection in how we go about taking care of people, and how we really have to get back to centering the person that is pregnant, the person who is actually living, breathing, and walking in this earth and experiencing all types of things, and just happen to be pregnant as well. And so this conversation is very near and dear to my heart in terms of the evolution, that I personally have gone through as a, 2% of physicians who are Black women, and let alone who knows how many of us are actually the OBGYNs who are helping people through these not so easy times of their lives when they're pregnant. So let's go ahead and get into the criminalization piece of this. Why is the state's interest in pregnancy a problem? Oops, I went the wrong way. And so, Ali, I'm going to hand it over to you to start to walk us through this a little bit.
I wish I could talk to the people here listening. I want to hear from them, also what they think, because I feel like now that I've just been fighting the state for so long, it's just like how, like, I'm just like, of course, the state is racist, the state is oppressive, like so many things, being an organizer, storyteller, right? Working with families intergenerationally, working with pregnant people, working with people coming home from prison, working with people facing deportation and fighting to stay with their families. I'm just like, oh, now they're going, of course, against attacking another community of people, right? And then I think they're also around, racial justice, gender violence, right? All of the, just like the impacts around just like leaving our care up to the state, frankly. I mean, I don't even have healthcare, right? Being in a place as an undocumented person, like, not having, opportunity to like, work, and, our insurance is tied to our employment, thinking of all those people who like, will never access healthcare. So how abortion bans had just even made it more difficult for people that already face barriers, right? So I think, the first thing that I think about why this is a problem, right, is again, the state has a very stringent way of looking at people, right? Not, the state doesn't even give gender affirming care, right? We're fighting right now in a state where they're trying to, criminalize parents of, trans kids, right? Just like, again, really seeing that this is a racialized issue, right? Like what Garen shared earlier, or Erica, was that, now there's a way for like people to like pay for an abortion only, which is in a sense what happens, right? Unless you're able to pay for anything, right? You're able to pay your way out of like, out of the justice court accountability, right? You can pay your way for quote unquote any crimes. You can, as long as you have money, you can get away with shit, right? And it's just so interesting, again, around how abortion bans impact. Who are they going to impact, right? People that cannot travel, people that can't afford it, people that, already, again, are so far from that care. So I think here in Arizona, we are facing a big crisis, right? We're like fourth in the state of like inflation of people getting criminalized. And I think policies have been the way that we've been able to just get people into our prison system, kind of, throw away that key, right? Our Department of Corrections has a big budget, but yet we see people literally having no support, no access, no healthcare, no rehabilitation in our prison system, right? I can just name right now, Proposition 301 back in 2006 was a policy that allowed judges to send people to prison, not jail, but prison for like small drug, convictions and charges, right? So I don't know if the folks here can share some links. I don't think I can share any links in the chat, but there are some links that I can share with you all just to kind of learn more a little bit and get more context about really, really what's happening in our state, right? And how I see this as such a threat to us, and preparing with like our local Tucson Bail Fund to think through jail support for people who are being criminalized for accessing their reproductive care, right? Or getting the things that they need. So it's really, really scary because, again, right, people that are queer, people that are trans, people that are immigrant, people that have a history of police interactions and drug abuse and all that will get more criminalized and will not have the benefit of the doubt, right, when they're accessing the care that they need. And it's really important that we are, again, investing in us. And I think the fighting the state has been a big thing in Arizona. And I'm working with a lot of communities right now, trying to defund right? The police, state, trying to fund, looking into the budget of like, where can we get money to have investments in us? You know, one of the biggest issues right now is also the incarceration, the growth of detention system, right? I think the biggest thing that we all have heard here in our communities is around abolition and defunding the police, right? And we know that because there will never be any reproductive justice as long as there's a threat of being caged and separated from your family indefinitely, right? And we have a history of sterilizing and using cages, using incarceration as a punishment, right? For if you don't want to be sterilized, right? We know that it's again more about control and white supremacy, right? Who gets to choose, who can have children, right? Whether you're forced or you're taking away the right, or you're forced to be pregnant. So I just think overall, there's just reproductive justice abuses everywhere, right? We are all very familiar with Dawn, one of the physicians who, whistleblow abuses happening in one of the detentions, Irwin County, right? We'll also share that link. In 2017, Georgia Social Justice Organization, Project South, some comrades of ours were really able to support, the nurse that documented records of abuse and neglect and sterilization, right? Right now, this is happening, right? We've heard it happen many times. So I think we're just at harms of the state, right? People that don't fall into the binary, right? If you've been criminalized in your life, you will continue to be criminalized at the hands of the state. I think I can share a little bit more as it comes up, but I think that's what I wanted to share around the carceral state, right? And what we really got to be vigilant about, and just the rises of criminalization that we're actually gonna be facing. And we're gonna be talking about who is police, right? And stuff. So yeah, I'll pass it. I don't know if Garen or Erica want to share anything. Thanks for those resources.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think to your point, like we understand that being in prison, being targeted by the carceral state is bad for your health. It's bad for your well-being. It's not good for you, right? And part of what we're talking about today is the fact that like this framework, this Roe framework, or any abortion ban at all, really, this state interest sort of expands who's eligible to be a criminal, right? And it criminalizes a class of people, and people are already criminalized for all sorts of reasons. And so one of the things that this does is it creates pregnancy as a path to criminalization.
And so when people are getting targeted and criminalized for behaviors that they wouldn't normally, except that they are pregnant. Drug use, for instance. If someone uses drugs, there aren't harsh penalties for that. But if they're pregnant, there are. And not only can they be criminalized for that pregnancy, but they can have their existing children taken away because of that behavior while pregnant.
And so again, like using a drug, having a drug in your system is not typically a crime. Possession of drug might be a crime, but using a drug is not typically a crime. But in some states, it's specifically a crime. And in fact, 45 states have tried to prosecute people, whether it's a law or not, for having used drugs while pregnant. Similarly, it's not illegal to fall downstairs normally. It's not illegal to get in a fight where no one's like charging you with assault. It's not illegal to drive a car without a seatbelt. I mean, you get a ticket, but you're not going to, have a harsh prison sentence for that. But all these things are examples of situations where, but for your pregnancy, you're being targeted.
I think because Dr. Taylor has this video queued up that we wanted to share with everyone. Dr. Taylor, do you want to set it up?
Yeah, so I know that some folks get really up in arms with this idea of defund the police. And so this 4-minute video actually is very well done in terms of understanding how justice is not meted, so-called justice is not meted out equally among us. And different people, different types of people have different experiences with the police. And so it's an opportunity for us to learn a little bit and to evaluate our thinking in our own relationship with the police and how that impacts how we see this issue. And so I'm going to go ahead and play this.
People have a lot of opinions about policing. And our ideas about policing are shaped by our race, our genders, our class, and our parents. For example, most white people have very little interaction with police. In a recent study, 77% of white people had no contact with police in the previous year. Of those who did, at least half were traffic stops. And in many cases, white people initiated contact by calling the police. Since they have little unwanted contact, many white people's opinions about policing are not based on personal experience. Dominant culture, especially mass media, sells us the image of officer-friendly, but whose experience is that actually based on? The same study found that Black people experience excessive force at the hands of police at more than twice the rate of white people. Did we have a just and equitable police force and something went wrong? No. Policing in the South emerged from the slave patrols in the 17 and 1800s that caught and returned runaway enslaved people. In the West, police departments were formed to keep Native people out of cities built by white settlers. And in the North, the first municipal police departments in the mid-1800s helped quash labor strikes and riots against the rich, and policed public spaces to conform to middle-class white morality around gender and sexuality and exclude poor, unhoused, or disabled people. Policing in the U.S. began as a system of economic, social, racial, patriarchal, and ableist control. And that is what it still is today. The truth is police don't do what most people think they do. Police spend more than half of their time responding to non-criminal calls and traffic issues, and only 1 to 3% of their time responding to violent crime calls. Police don't stop violence. They respond to violence that has already occurred, and they respond with their own threat of violence. And that response is not equitable. When people of color are involved, police often engage violently. Yet we spend an astronomical amount of money on the police, over $100 billion a year. Let that sink in. The demand to defund the police is about minimizing the role and power of police in our society. It's about demanding that the government stop writing blank checks for racist control, containment, and punishment. Defunding the police is also about recognizing that police do not solve or address any social issues. They do not prevent harm. What if we took that $100 billion and invested it in our community? What if we had housing, access to healthy food and clean water, health care, healing, cooperative businesses, education, child care, parks, art, and community services? If you already have those things, great. But that's not the reality everywhere. Ask yourself, if we have the resources, why doesn't everyone have this?
And this is what we tell people too, like immigrant families, right? Less police, less deportation officers, less police collaboration, right? I think we've only as a society used police as a form to keep each other safe or addressing harm when we know cops get there after, right? The harm has already been made, right? When we call the police, actually more harm is happening. So really excited to have it in this video comprehensively.
We all don't have equal, we don't have equitable, we don't have similar relationships with the police. And so therefore, we are, when we talk about introducing pregnant people into more surveillance and the possibility of being criminalized, then because we already have this inequitable setup, then it's going to be disproportionately impacting people who already have difficult relationships with the police.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go ahead and continue our discussion points here. Thank you guys for bearing with us.
Thank you. I urge people to really check out this link too, and I think they already posted it, Erica and Garen. And I really appreciate Prison Policy. I appreciate Forward.us. I appreciate just all of the resources and people that want to support organizing in Arizona. But the truth is we don't have robust organizing against the Department of Corrections or any incarceration. So just look at this graphic here. It's so scary, right? Our loved ones are inside. Right? That's our loved ones. I right now have to fight for someone to come home and not go to prison when mental health could have been addressed. Right? So seeing how easy it is through policy to shut out healthcare, to privatize it, right? Mental health, to privatize it, to make it not our problem, right? It's just really scary. And then look at the US, how it's leading globally in incarceration, right? Again, we found that we can profit from this, right? So we're seeing in other states robust organizing around the crisis of incarceration in their state. So I'm really excited to also be able to talk about this again, because I'm formerly incarcerated myself and now facing deportation for things that other people just get a slap in the hand, right? White people get to not even they get to pay their way out of that. And the truth of the matter is, most of us can't, right? And once you've been known to be to have impacted by incarceration, it's really hard. If you don't have real strong support systems, it's hard for you to get your life back. It really, really does destroy life. So really want to thank the Prison Policy and for even Dr. Deshawn, for you to bring this conversation around defunding the police. Look for your local orgs here in Phoenix. Follow Poder in Action. I'll actually drop their name. They're having an actual big campaign to defund, to take away some of the police budget at the Phoenix city level and actually create a rehabilitation center and substance abuse center for young people, Latinx people, young people in the west side of Phoenix, right? And it's an intergenerational fight. Mothers are fighting for the police budget, for the general budget in Phoenix, so they can start investing in their own communities.
Thank you, Ale. Just to quickly piggyback on that excellent explanation, I just want to make a link back to Roe and make sure folks understand that the PIC, the prison industrial complex, looked very different in 1973 than it looks today in 2022. Okay, and so applying a standard from 1973 to now, when we have this ballooned giant carceral militarized policing apparatus, and as you can see on the screen, particularly in Arizona, when the state has an interest in something, it protects that interest with policing power, violence, and punishment. But again, when we codify that standard in Arizona specifically, it means inviting these police, the people who shot tear gas out of the Capitol at peaceful protesters who were just protesting abortion rights. Those are the people whose power we're reinforcing by, in modern times, enshrining their interest in pregnancy and their interest in our lives, period.
Yeah, and so this, in a way, this is a small, abortion rights, reproductive justice. We can keep sort of making that circle bigger and bigger to encompass more parts of people's lives. But ultimately, what we're talking about is that when we as a society or voters or whoever is concerned about something, like if people are concerned about abortion, or if people are concerned about people being unhoused, or if people are concerned about drug use, the problem is that our reaction is always criminalize it, to punish it, to surveil it, right? And what we need to do generally is move away from that as a response to every social issue that we have. And understand that there are other options that are more effective and that are better for our communities and our well-being, that we should be embracing and pursuing.
Absolutely. I am going to talk a little bit about liability. Because this is when we talk about fetal viability, that's when we make abortion bans possible. And so one of the concerns that we've had about the push to create laws or create constitutional amendments to specifically use this language, then we are de facto banning abortion for somebody, because viability is a vague standard. But in all honesty, what is a viable pregnancy can vary from circumstance to circumstance, from person to person, from region to region. When we talk about something called obstetrical standard, what we've determined in a specific region, honestly, in a specific city, maybe even in a specific hospital, is that there is a gestational week that a pregnancy can attain where, with all of the resources available in that particular piece of that particular space for that pregnant person, then should a birth occur, that infant then can be kept alive. Okay. And what I often argue with a lot of people who make it their life's work to keep prematurely born infants alive is, at what cost? At what cost is it that we have all the technology in the world, and once we have an infant born extremely prematurely, what are we doing to create a life that's worth living for that individual once it's born? And so often the question really is, should a birth occur? And of course, there are going to be pregnant people who want every possible effort made and every piece of technology available and afforded to them to help a very extremely prematurely born infant survive. But there are many other people who are forced into this reality because of the state's interest, which then becomes the hospital's interest, which then becomes the healthcare team's interest, to force a birth and do measures that many neonatologists would say harms the infant once it's born. And so I'll share an experience that I personally encountered during my training, where we had someone who, because of where I trained, we did not have a provider who was skilled to provide a surgical abortion at 22 weeks. At my program, we had a skilled provider up to 18 weeks, which is still more access than a lot of hospitals have across the country for pregnant people and for people training. So that person had an induction of labor, and this person was laboring. They had a chromosomal abnormality of the pregnancy that was not compatible with life, meaning that once a birth occurred, that there would be death within 24 hours of the infant once born. And so we were providing this induction, and we had already prepared the family, because back then when I was training, it wasn't there. Some of the additional things that are done now to as part of abortion care was not available 21 years ago when I first started my residency program. And so the team, the neonatal team, the respiratory therapists would come by and check the board, what we call it, and like, what's going on over in that room over there in the back? And we're like, you don't need to worry about what's going on in that room over in the back. And he told us, you know that I'm going to have to resuscitate. And so amongst ourselves, we were like, this is an abortion, and we really just need to make sure this person, delivers and we follow through with their wishes without having this harm forced on the family and the infant that we know is not going to live. Ultimately, though, the resuscitation team got involved, and there was a resuscitation, and the infant did pass away in less than like 12 hours. And then the family sued the hospital for wrongful birth. And so in that particular instance, the question is, should a birth occur? And quite honestly, in someone who has spontaneous rupture of membranes at 24 weeks, for example, who is in a rural hospital, has a very different outcome when a birth occurs than someone who lives in a city with a tertiary team of, neonatologists and maternal fetal medicine specialists who are up on the best research and have all of the bells and whistles in the hospital, et cetera. And so when we create these arbitrary cutoffs for when an abortion can happen versus when one cannot, then we're not taking into account the nuances of an individual in their pregnancy. And we definitely haven't created the conditions for people to raise disabled children, because ultimately, when there are these very premature pregnancies, or when we have forced birth of pregnancies with severe genetic abnormalities, then there are a great deal of resources that are required that families are ultimately not resourced to handle. And so I know that Erica and Garen have some additional things that they want to say about viability, and I'll pass it on to you two.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Yeah, I think sort of the hinge there that is very important for folks to sit and internalize is the should birth occur part. That actually is the sort of most important part of any definition, because it's important to know that to people who are pregnant, who want to be pregnant, who hope that it makes it to birth, we're talking about milestones that matter deeply to pregnant people who want to be pregnant. It's when you start telling people, you start to get used to the idea, you're looking up whether you're a tomato or you're an avocado this week. The problem is that when those standards are weaponized against people who don't want to be pregnant, okay? And so we can talk about the conditions when birth occurs in situations where people so desperately want to make it there. And that's certainly an important conversation to have. But when we're talking about those same standards being applied to everyone and weaponized against people who don't want to be pregnant, and applying a legal standard to that comes along with surveillance, punishment, and criminalization, is where we have to, I think, focus policy discussions in the future, or legislative efforts that we all want to hopefully work on together, because I think it's the kind of issue that brings up a lot of feelings for people, and I think that's fine. I mean, again, I had a 3rd trimester abortion. I have made deep peace with it. My pregnancy would never be, quote, viable. I didn't learn that until the 3rd trimester, but what it taught me in a very real, visceral way is that you don't really truly know whether a pregnancy is viable until the day you give birth. Otherwise, it's an estimation, it's a guess. You're in that movie, Memento. Is that the right movie? I don't even know if I'm citing the right movie.
You haven't seen that movie.
But where you're basically like, criminalizing people and making estimations based on a projected view of the future. And I know very well in my soul and my heart that you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And so the people that are best positioned to make decisions about their pregnancies and their individual circumstances. And by the way, only a pregnant person knows if that pregnancy is viable for their lives. Okay. Whether that is a pregnancy that is viable for them, because there's no such thing as a healthy pregnancy absent consent. So if you're talking to me about a forced pregnancy without the explicit consent of the pregnant person, that is not a healthy pregnancy. And so what we're talking about is forcing people to be pregnant based on the circumstances of people who desperately want to be pregnant and jump through hoops and move mountains to be able to make that pregnancy happen. We're talking about two entirely different populations of people. And I think that that is okay, because the more specific we are, the closer we're getting to people's real particular experiences and the way the law affects them.
Or we're talking about the same people at different points in their life. And that's really
Correct.
important. People get abortions, people have pregnancies, people have miscarriages. They're all the same people. The other
For
thing,
some of us, it's within the same year and a half.
yeah. The other thing I just want to note is that a lot of what Dr. Taylor talked about was a really medicalized thing. Like the concept of potential fetal viability is a very medicalized thing. And so what the court did in Roe is they said, we don't know, so we're going to ask doctors to become an extension of the criminal justice system, so to speak, and decide on each pregnancy for us. So doctors become the gatekeepers to what is legal and what is not. Instead, and so doctors are put in a position, and we're seeing this across the United States right now, where doctors are put in the position of deciding, do I want to potentially break the law or be prosecuted and then have to defend myself? Or do I just not provide care? And as one abortion provider told me way back, you can't be prosecuted for an abortion you don't provide. So many providers simply say, you know what, it is not worth it. And so they either don't provide care close to the line.
That's called the chilling effect.
And that's called a chilling effect. So care that should be legal is then not provided because no one wants to get close to it and risk prosecution, and they shouldn't risk prosecution, or they just simply don't provide care, period. And that's why a lot of hospitals for decades have been, outsourcing the unpleasantness of abortion to independent abortion clinics and just not dealing with it. And
I'll say, and I understand that calculation. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to put myself in that position and and go through that myself. I understand the individual decisions people make. What I don't understand is why medical associations would support a standard that has criminal implications for themselves. So, and I'll say ACOG has really evolved on this.
What's ACOG?
ACOG, I'm sorry, the American College of Gynecologists, of which I'm sure Dr. Taylor is a member. They have really evolved on their positions on abortion bans even recently. We'll put their latest position in the chat. I'm sharing it because they are a conservative organization and they unequivocally do not support abortion bans, and this is an evolution for them. Okay.
That's really great to hear. And I think as I'm hearing all of this, as an abortion doula, as somebody who's been helping people get to clinics, get the care that they need, and answering questions, fundraising for people, right? I'm just like, none of the shit that y'all are talking about matters to this young ass person that's been fighting their family, their abusive boyfriend, right? Lack of information and resources and birth control, right? And this person is needing a late-term pregnancy. And all I could think about was these folks that I met as I'm giving people rides, and how these people, we are the only people that they actually get to talk about, right? And that, that's, walking this path of getting their abortion care. And it just really fucking sucks that, through policy, right? Like people's lives are really directly impacted, and young people just know that they are not going to have an abortion. They cannot have a pregnancy, right? And it's just really, really scary times. And I think the confusion has impacted people. And I'm just so thankful historically, right, for the Brazilian women that tried these abortion pills and let us know exactly how we can also have safe abortions at home. And I know even that's a conversation, and people getting criminalized for self-managing abortions. And just, it makes me really think of like, wow, like we need to keep building our relationships and our trust systems, right? So that we can get the care that we need, because a lot of us, already are supporting people who become pregnant, right? Not just providers too. So I just want to really like ground us in just like how many of us have experienced, pregnancy, miscarriages, birth at home, right? And just again, how the state wants to really like interfere in that, right? And make us be, go back, to being in fear too. And, it's just really an unfortunate time, but it's also super, super great to be like, again, awakened and having conversations and making sure we're keeping ourselves safe from criminalization. That's already going to be there regardless, right? So yeah, thanks for that information. I learned so much in this piece of you all sharing right now on viability.
Yes, and so we want to move into how do we create something better? Before we go there, I do want to share that as a member of the American College for Obstetricians Gynecologists, unfortunately, there is a faction of OBGYNs who are anti-abortion. And for many years, they forced the hand of the entire organization to lean more conservatively, just like, our country. Most people who are left are probably more like center compared to truly being progressive, right? And then people who are center are probably to the right, et cetera. That organization was also the same because of those people. But what they did do over the past decade is what the abortion providing community did over the past decade is really like force our seat at the table to start contributing to the work of the college. I personally, was on the committee for healthcare for underserved women, which has pushed a lot of the more progressive policies that the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has introduced. My committee membership just ended a couple of months ago, but very proud of what happens when you actually bring people who provide abortion care to the table when we're starting to make policies and really talk about how to expand healthcare for everybody. So thank you, Erica and Garen, for bringing forth that bit of information. And it's been a long time coming where and it's our movement. This is what reproductive justice is about, is centering the voices of the impacted people. So we're talking about the people who provide abortions. We're talking about the people who seek abortions. We're talking about the people who love, care for, and help facilitate a person's abortion. And so when we make our voices heard, when we take control of the narrative, that's when we start to see the change that we need to see. So for those of you, who are thinking about what you can do, one of the most important things you can do is find your voice and use it. We are going to transition to our vision for something better. Erica and Garen have some policy points to share, and Ale will bring it home with the reproductive justice perspective, and then we'll take a few minutes for some questions, and then we'll close out with calls to action and final thoughts from the panelists. Erica and Garen?
Yeah. Very quickly, just a couple things. State legislation has to remove the state's power to override our bodily autonomy. That's kind of it at the simplest. There have been proactive bills that have passed in Colorado, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, and they're structured in this way. They name fundamental rights to make reproductive choices or to obtain or deny contraception, sterilization, abortion care, etc. They say that a public body or entity or law or any sort of state actor may not interfere with those rights. And then they just don't leave anybody out. That's literally how you do it. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
If you are hashtag bans off our bodies, hashtag abortion is healthcare, just actually believe that, and know that that is just true. And that isn't like to a point.
Yeah.
So literally it's just stating what you want and then not carving anybody out, especially because we know those most likely to need care later are young people, very young people, poor people, people of color, people with very complex medical conditions, disabled people. So literally you have to just decide not to carve out the people who have the least amount of time and the least amount of resources to get care.
Yep. And so in a way, like we think about it, like there are abortion bans, right? There are laws that look like this, right? This is the law. This could be an abortion law, right? It's just not talked about in the law at all, right? Or you can have a proactive law like the ones Erica listed that name a fundamental right and then limit the state's power to interfere. And that's what we ideally want to build here in Arizona.
Oh yeah. I see a question. Yeah, so I think I love it because again, we're talking of abolition work. Abolition, we've heard around the prison industrial complex, right? How do we divest from that and start investing at the things that we need in order to not need prisons, right? Which is the same with policing. And then we don't leave anyone behind, right? All of us are none. Something the immigrant rights movement is still learning. You know, we've fallen into the good and bad narrative, right? Like, which is the kind of the same as like abortions, but I support abortions, but right. So I really, really love grounding us in that. But yeah, at the same time too, the things that we need to create, right? If we don't trust the state, we know we're not safe with the state. What are the things that we can engage with now to start building, you know, the systems that we do need, right? I think there's 3 things that I can share, and I'll just like even just type them in here, just so if folks, I don't know if folks are taking notes because y'all went to school with us. No, but I think it's just the biggest thing is normalize, right? To stigmatize and decriminalize. And as a community organizer on the ground, I think there's just a couple of things that we're thinking of, that we are doing. First and foremost, obviously, thinking through our storytelling work, right? We really know and understand how culture informs and shapes laws, right? You know, we've, you know, our uncles are, you know, people we know have been cops, that, you know, have worked in ICE, have worked in corrections, right? Are people have voted for more police in many states of crisis and desperation, right? Because we've been giving that as the only tool, right, that we've only had. So I think for us, it's around sharing that we actually have other answers and we want to invest in other solutions for how we answer harm, right? And answer the needs of people. There's so many nuances in people's circumstances, as we have been sharing today. So I feel like definitely being clear on that and being active, right? We hear that voting is not going to save us, right? You know, voting is not the only thing, but I think also being interfering with democracy processes is super important, which leads me to one of the tangible things you all can do in your localities is join and support defund organizing work. I know if you're in the Phoenix area, I shared a title for Poder en Action. I'm really, really like inspired by their work. I do interpretation weekly for their base, their membership, their core organizers, and they're looking into how to you know, learn about the budget process in the city. And I can tell you all that just in the city, the cops get so much money, like 700 or some crazy amount of money, billion or million or something. And they, you know, they're fighting to get that money, to be like, hey, we know you have money, we want some of that. We don't want it to go to police, we want it to go to rehab center, substance abuse, you know, blah, 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 blah. So it's this idea of all of us supporting work that's divesting to investing. Even if you don't want to organize, divest from Bank of America, because they're, again, right, it's just this like idea of being more active and aware, and actually what you do and your actions do matter. And I think the other piece is relationship building and network building, right? More than ever right now, we know we have to keep each other safe from criminalization, right? If you're not connected to somebody or some resources, right, like you're going to be out in the margins, right? So I think it's about staying connected and looking after one another, right, in your neighborhood, right? Being able to see each other, not watch one another, you know? I always think about how many neighbors do I know? As an organizer and a student of abolition, even in my own community, right? I don't know a lot of my neighbors. So that work, right? What is that work that's gonna, you know, happen micro level in our community? So I think those are some, like, how do we create new things, is again, some of these different tactics for us to be more engaged and cause ripple effects, you know? So really proud of organizing in Phoenix, y'all. If you're in Phoenix, wherever you're at, look up some defunding work and support your local bail funds and obviously your local abortion fund. I know Erica had mentioned, and again here, mutual aid projects build power and help people and are a great way to create change without waiting for someone else to save us, right? And obviously it's really hard, right? There's so many barriers. So yeah, mutual aid efforts, and we know a lot of them. I know Latinx communities have been doing, fun, like money fundraising, right? Cundinas, where we share with each other money because you can't get a loan, right? So we're very familiar with taking care of one another, So I'm just, again, it's a moment that's asking for us to really reflect on that. Should we go into one of the questions?
Yeah, so so there are questions in the chat. There's one in the Q&A. I want to address one, my volleyball isn't working too well, so I can't see the name of the person, but it says, I also wonder about a chilling effect for the future regarding having enough providers. If this hostile climate causes current future medical students to steer away from learning, offering abortion care. So this is something that is very concerning for me. We are going to see the repercussions of this moment in time reverberate for generations, because what we were already seeing before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade was a graying of providers, doctors in general. Less people were deciding to become doctors, more people were deciding to do more of the advanced practice clinician level things. Hospitals started to divest from medical education and start to invest in this other group of healthcare labor that is less expensive. And so we just had overall less doctors, new doctors entering into the pool. And so when you have even a lesser number of those people being abortion providers, then you were already seeing these abortion deserts, not just because of policy, but because the community did not have a provider who was skilled to perform abortions for people who needed them in their community. And so once you put both of those things together, then you start to see the pattern of where people had access to care based on their zip codes. And some of it was lack of a provider, not necessarily a specific policy. And so over the course of time, we had less opportunities for people to train to learn abortion care. People do not learn abortion care in medical school, full stop. It doesn't happen. They don't. Less than 30 minutes is the average of medical education that happens for medical students around abortion. And then in their residency programs, people expect that, oh, my OB/GYN should be able to just do my abortion. Well, you have people who opt out of the care. You have a proliferation of Catholic hospitals, Catholic institutions that buy out all the hospitals and therefore restrict the ability for people to learn to provide abortion care. And then there's not an independent provider in the community that will bring trainees in to train them. So we were already starting to see a problem even before Roe v. Wade was overturned. I personally have been training people for 5 years in Phoenix through my nonprofit. And I have had people come from 17 states and 3 regions of Canada to Phoenix to learn how to provide abortion care with me in 5 years. And half of them were from hostile states, states hostile to abortion care. So they took those sales back to where they came from. So this is going to be a huge, huge problem. And thank you for asking that question to think about it, because I think this is, I think while people are really thinking about like the immediate impacts of things now, the long-term effects are going to be, we're going to be having a difficult time for some time. Let me see. So Michael Alexander, I share Shelby's concerns regarding the emphasis on electoral politics. How is decoloniality materially expressed instead of idealistic, abstract ways? So Michael, do you feel that, Ali's discussion, answered that question a bit, or would you like some additional thoughts on that? there's a lot of messages, and I don't know what's going on.
I do want to say one thing about like the sort of our general lack of faith in a way in some electoral politics and stuff. I think it's important to note that we have to build what we want in terms of a policy and a vision, and then work to create that. And we might be creating that through mutual aid projects, community projects, ensuring there are enough providers, but also through legislation, through electing better people or getting the elected people to understand the issue better. And so in a way, like, I think these things are all related, and we can't rely on one, like electoral politics only. And I think that's the real thing. We have to think about it as one tool in the sort of bigger project.
Because then we get Wendy Rogers.
We
So,
can't
I'm just
ignore it.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will continue to show up and vote.
And
Yeah,
thoughts are asked for a little bit more, yeah.
yeah. I'm like definitely appreciate your question, Michael. Alexander. So I think for me, the way that I started doing electoral politics work, I think it really informed me as an organizer, as what kind of organizer I want to be, what kind of tactics I want to, spend my energy in. So I definitely understand that. I feel like mutual aid, right, has been a way for me to actually think through, what is the most, like, I don't know, tangible way that I can be like in community with my people, right? Or be in relation and not have to, rely on the state, right? As an organizer, I belong to some community organizations that, have tactics like, within the state, outside of the state, against the state, right? And really hitting, hitting all the different kinds of tactics. So I feel like, I feel like having to really understand that, like, again, abolition, even, right, the kind of abolition democracy we have right now is always asking a state agent, right, or asking a politician, or asking the governor, right, to give us this emancipation, right, this liberation, this access, this right. When we already know we are, like, born with this right. So I just think it's I don't know, and I don't think I will be answering your question correctly, right? Like, I don't fucking know everything, and even that word you're using, like decolonial, like all of that is like still very much new language for me, right? Because I think, again, I've lived at the fact that I've just been criminalized, period, right? And like, what are the things I need to do to keep myself safe? What are the things that worked for me around even my own growth and destigmatizing, decriminalizing my own self, right? There's a lot of that even work. So I think, again, the best way for that, I've like lived out my organizing work and advocacy and fighting colonialism has been through storytelling, right? To stigma busting, taboo busting, right? Really having unapologetic information sharing, and doing it in a way that also knows that we're being soft with our people and meeting our people where they're at. So yeah, I would love to chat more. I don't know. I think you may follow me on social media about these things and even learn of some ideas that you have. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Thanks, Ale. I do want to address the question in the Q&A, and I also have some thoughts about some of the discussion that's been happening. So the question in the chat says, how will doctors / OBGYNs contend with the abortion struggle as workers? How will they contend with internal class contradictions that are often antagonistic to their clients regarding abortions? And I think I started to allude to this a little bit earlier on when I was discussing my own personal journey, in that where we are able to start to bridge the gap between the experiences our patients are having and the care that we're providing for them is to actually center the lived experiences of the patients that we're taking care of, to actually look at the person who we are caring for holistically, not just as a pregnant uterus that needs to be cared for, but the totality of their existence in the world. And that requires a very special lens. It's something that has to be developed because it is not taught in medical school. It is not taught in residency. My personal way that I train people is from a reproductive justice lens. And I train the future doctors who work with me that you look at the entire patient. It's not the patient. The patient has a name. The patient is a person, and you have to start seeing the person in front of you and see them and hear them and acknowledge them and validate them and listen to them. Because until we start doing that, we are going to continue to see these very poor outcomes for our patients as it relates to general health care in general and pregnancy-related trauma and harm that people experience when they are continuing pregnancies and going through childbirth. One place where class is not contradicted is Black women physicians. There was just a colleague of mine who posted in one of our groups that she had a very traumatic pregnancy and delivery, and she is a whole physician herself already, and a whole OBGYN herself. And so a lot of the class contradictions fall away when you're looking at people of color, specifically Black pregnant people, because studies show that our mortality is still higher even once you take away our income and our so-called social class standing. So, but I think that, and the important thing is, there is now this whole diversity and inclusion thing, and that's really virtue signaling. It's not really thinking about how to be truly inclusive and understanding of different lived experiences and incorporating those into policy and decision making. But hopefully that's a start to answering that question for you. But it's really, it is part of what I wanted to say, and I acknowledge the time, it's 7:30, and so we'll be wrapping this up, is that it's really important, as Ali mentioned, about the idea that we are disrupting systems. And I think Erica and Garen may have mentioned that in some kind of way too. Like we have to say that the status quo no longer works, and we refuse to continue to participate in the status quo. And it's scary. It's scary to say, to let go of something that, although is not great, is what you know. And so the only way that we start to see a real impact on how we are getting the most impacted and most vulnerable among us protected is because we are looking to create solutions that will make their lives better. And once we commit to doing that, then everybody's life is better, right? And so that is where we are. We have to let the status quo go. And so
That's an awesome place to end, by the way.
No, that's an amazing
last point.
Yeah, let the status quo go. And so if we can just take a couple more minutes of you guys' time to just finish up with some call to actions. I did have a call to action slide that I wanted to share. Ale gave some great calls to action while she was talking through her last part here. And so some of the things that I thought about here was, as you are walking away from this discussion tonight, educate your friends, family, and peers about the importance of access to safe, affordable abortion. Talk with your friends, family, and peers about the connection between abortion bans, policing, surveillance, and criminalization of abortion providers and seekers. Gather with your friends and colleagues to read and learn more about reproductive justice. I mean, we can just have a discussion on reproductive justice for hours in and of itself. And I know we had some discussions about voting and electoral, but please commit to voting during the November election, because this is one of the most important elections for Arizona in a post-Roe world. We have the governor the Attorney General and the Maricopa County Attorney that we need to have on our side when abortion is no longer legal in the state. That is the state's interest currently in this moment of time, is that we do not have access to abortion at all. And they are moving to make that a reality. And with the loss of Roe v. Wade, although not the greatest, but that protection, then it really gives advocates an uphill battle to try to stop that from happening. And then also, as Ali mentioned, not only vote, but get involved with organizations working for reproductive justice for all Arizonans. And is there anything additional that anyone would like to share before we close?
Watch the video. Since we had hiccups with it, we'll watch the Defund the Police video, share it with at least, text it to 5 friends and family.
Absolutely. Well, all right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This was great discussion. Thank you, Erica and Garen. Thank you, Ale. Thanks to all of you who participated in the discussion. And, just follow us and stay in the loop, and we'll let you know the next time we're doing something like this. And all of us are doing our part, and you do yours too. All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Rest up, Dr. Deshawn.
Thank you.